Maya's mundane shopping trip turns into a nightmare when she is falsely accused of stealing by the store manager, Mr. Wilson. Determined to rise above the humiliation, Maya devises a plan to save the struggling store and prove her worth. As they clash and collaborate, hidden biases and secrets come to light, raising the stakes of their partnership. Can Maya transform not just the store, but also the heart of the man who once wronged her? Before we get started, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from. Let's dive in. The day felt typical enough for Maya as she walked down the main street towards the store. It was just another errand on her long list of things to do. Her college workload was mounting, and with her part-time job hours cutting into her study time, she had been feeling the weight of balancing her life more than ever. The sky was a deep, cloudless blue, a reflection of the peace she had hoped to find today after submitting her midterm project. But Maya had no idea how quickly her day was about to change. As she walked into the store, a local, family-run business she had been frequenting for years, she noticed nothing unusual. She had her list in hand, and her thoughts swirling around the things she needed to buy. A few notebooks, some pens, and folders for organizing her class notes. Maya prided herself on being efficient, so she moved with purpose down the aisles, not giving much thought to her surroundings. But unbeknownst to Maya, someone was watching her. From behind the checkout counter, Mr. Wilson, the store manager, tracked her every move. In his late 40s, with a gruff demeanor and a quick judgmental streak, Mr. Wilson prided himself on being vigilant about loss prevention. He believed his gut instinct was sharper than any security camera, sharper than any sensor at the door. And today, his gut was telling him something about Maya didn't sit right. Maya was completely unaware of Mr. Wilson's growing suspicion as she picked up a small stack of notebooks. She examined their quality, debating which would last her the semester. As she lingered a little too long for Mr. Wilson's liking, his frown deepened. He had seen customers like her before, or at least he believed he had. Young, black, and in his mind, suspicious. Over the years, his biases had been reinforced by his own narrative. Stories he'd convinced himself were true, stories where young black men and women caused the most trouble in his store. The reality, however, was quite different. But that didn't stop Mr. Wilson from allowing those preconceived notions to govern his actions. When Maya placed the notebooks into her cart, unaware of anything except her shopping list, Mr. Wilson moved in. He strode toward her, his steps heavy with the weight of his certainty. As he neared, Maya turned, startled by his presence. "Excuse me, miss," Mr. Wilson said, his voice sharp, almost accusatory. "I need to check your bag." Maya blinked, caught completely off guard. "I'm sorry, what?" "I need to see inside your bag," he repeated, his eyes narrowing. His tone left no room for misunderstanding. He wasn't asking, he was demanding. Maya's heart began to race. She could feel a knot of anger and confusion rising in her chest. She'd been coming to this store for years, always paying for her items, never once causing trouble. Why was this happening now? She glanced around the store, noticing other customers watching, their curiosity quickly shifting into judgment. "I haven't taken anything," Maya said, her voice steady but edged with tension. "You can check your cameras if you think I've done something wrong." Mr. Wilson crossed his arms, his expression stern. "Just let me see inside your bag, and we can settle this right now." Maya's mind raced. How had this happened? How had a simple shopping trip turned into an accusation of theft? She wanted to protest, to scream at the injustice of it all, but she also knew that losing her temper wouldn't help. Instead, she took a slow breath and opened her bag, showing Mr. Wilson the empty space where he expected to find stolen goods. For a brief moment, Mr. Wilson hesitated, as if the absence of stolen items was a personal affront. His frown deepened, but instead of apologizing, his words came out gruff and dismissive. "Just be careful next time." "Next time?" Maya's voice broke through, louder now, challenging. "I didn't do anything wrong. You had no right to accuse me like that." Other customers were still staring, some with pity, others with curiosity. But no one said a word. No one intervened. Mr. Wilson didn't respond. He turned on his heel and walked back toward the counter, leaving Maya standing there, humiliated and furious. Her hands trembled as she stuffed the notebooks back onto the shelf. She couldn't finish her shopping, not now. Not here. Without another word, she grabbed her bag, turned, and marched out of the store. Her steps quick and determined, trying to outrun the humiliation clinging to her. Outside, the warmth of the sun did nothing to ease the ache in her chest. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't cry over this. She couldn't let it break her. That night, as she sat with her best friend Tasha in their small apartment, Maya recounted the story, her voice heavy with the weight of her frustration and disbelief. "I didn't even do anything. He just assumed I was stealing because of the way I look." Tasha, her dark eyes wide with anger, slammed her hand on the kitchen table. "That's messed up, Maya. You should report him." Maya shook her head. "Report him to who? It won't change anything. He'll just deny it. And even if he admits it, what good will it do? He'll keep thinking like that, and people like me will keep being treated this way." "But you can't let him get away with it," Tasha argued. Maya sighed. "I know, but I've got bigger things to focus on right now. Finals are coming up and I can't afford to get distracted." Deep down, though, Maya couldn't shake the feeling of injustice. The incident gnawed at her, the unfairness of it all threatening to consume her thoughts. But she wasn't one to dwell in anger for long. She had always been resilient, determined to rise above the challenges life threw her way. Still, as she lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, Maya made a quiet vow to herself. One day she would show people like Mr. Wilson that their snap judgments and prejudices were not only wrong but harmful. She didn't know how or when, but she knew that day would come. For now, though, she had to focus on her studies. That was her way forward. But the fire that had been lit inside her by Mr. Wilson's wrongful accusation wouldn't easily be extinguished. It would fuel her in ways she couldn't yet foresee. Weeks had passed since that awful day at the store, but the sting of the incident still clung to Maya, like an unwelcome shadow she couldn't quite shake. She had thrown herself into her studies and part-time job, hoping that staying busy would help dull the memory. Yet, every time she passed by the store on her way to school or work, she felt a familiar wave of irritation and discomfort wash over her. It wasn't the accusation itself that gnawed at her anymore. It was the way it had happened. Mr. Wilson hadn't just doubted her honesty, he had judged her solely based on her appearance. The knowledge that something so simple, something so arbitrary as her skin color, had made her a target still felt deeply unjust. But Maya wasn't someone who allowed herself to wallow. She had dreams, goals, and a future to focus on. That was where her energy needed to go, not into some store manager's prejudice. Still, life has a funny way of bringing things full circle when you least expect it. One bright Saturday morning, Maya found herself standing outside the same store she had promised herself never to enter again. This time, however, she wasn't there for herself. Her best friend, Tasha, had landed an interview for a part-time position at the store, and despite Maya's obvious reservations, she had agreed to come along for moral support. "I can't believe you're even thinking about working here," Maya said, crossing her arms and glancing at the familiar front door. Tasha shrugged with a sheepish grin. I know, but I need the extra cash, and it's close to campus. Besides, it's just a job. It's not like I'm signing my life away." Maya bit her lip, her mind racing with the memory of her last encounter with Mr. Wilson. She hadn't told Tasha the full extent of how humiliating the situation had been. Sure, she had mentioned the wrongful accusation, but the deeper, more personal impact of the incident, the way it had made her feel small and invisible, was something she hadn't fully articulated, even to her closest friend. "I just don't want you to go through what I did," Maya said softly, her voice tinged with concern. Tasha smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry about me, Maya. I've got thick skin. Besides, I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm just going to ace the interview and get my paycheck." Maya wanted to argue, but Tasha's optimism was hard to challenge. So instead, she sighed and followed her friend inside. The store felt eerily the same as it had the last time Maya had been there. The layout was identical, the aisles stocked with the same mundane items she had once browsed, and the faint buzz of background music hummed quietly over the sound of customers chatting and clerks scanning items. For a brief moment, Maya considered waiting outside while Tasha interviewed, but she couldn't bring herself to leave her friend alone. Not in this place. As Tasha went to the back of the store for her interview, Maya wandered near the entrance, her eyes scanning the shelves out of habit. And that's when she noticed it. Something she hadn't observed the last time. The store was quiet, far too quiet. The usual buzz of activity was missing, and the foot traffic seemed sparse. In the past, Maya had remembered the store being busy, full of college students and locals popping in for quick purchases. Now it felt different. The shelves were stocked, but there was a lack of energy. A noticeable absence of customers milling around. Something had changed. Maya's curiosity piqued. As a marketing student, her brain naturally began to pick apart the situation. She couldn't help but notice the outdated displays, the cluttered shelves, and the lack of signage that should have drawn people in. The store's layout felt inefficient, and she could easily see why it might be turning customers away. In her mind, it was clear. This store was in trouble, and it was bleeding customers without even realizing it. Lost in her analysis, Maya didn't notice Mr. Wilson walking toward her. It wasn't until she heard his voice, cold and professional, that she snapped out of her thoughts. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, his tone bordering on impatient. Maya turned to face him, her eyes meeting his. For a split second, neither of them said anything. It was clear Mr. Wilson recognized her, though he showed no sign of acknowledging their past encounter. "No, I'm just waiting for my friend," Maya replied coolly. Mr. Wilson gave a curt nod, but didn't move. He hovered as if waiting for her to leave. The tension between them was palpable. For a moment, Maya felt her anger flare up again. But then she noticed something else. Mr. Wilson looked tired. Not just in the physical sense, but worn down, like a man under pressure. There was a heaviness in his eyes, and Maya, ever observant, didn't miss it. The store's decline was hitting him hard, she realized. Despite her personal feelings, Maya found herself considering what the store could do to turn things around. Her business mind began calculating the ways this place could attract customers again, improve its image, and increase foot traffic. She had always been naturally inclined to solve problems like this, to analyze a situation and figure out what needed to change to make it work better. Before she could stop herself, the words spilled out. "You know," Maya began, "you could probably bring more customers in if you updated your layout. It's kind of hard to find things here and the signage isn't really clear." Mr. Wilson blinked, clearly caught off guard by her unsolicited suggestion. His face tightened, but he didn't interrupt her. "And," she continued, gaining momentum, "you could also do a lot with social media. If you promoted deals online and reached out to the college crowd, you'd get more people in here. Students love discounts." For a moment, there was silence. Maya braced herself for the inevitable cold dismissal, for Mr. Wilson to wave her off or snap at her for offering advice he hadn't asked for. But to her surprise, he didn't. Instead, he seemed to consider her words carefully, his frown deepening as he processed what she had said. "I'll keep that in mind," Mr. Wilson said stiffly, though it was clear he wasn't entirely comfortable with the conversation. Maya nodded, unsure of what else to say. She wasn't trying to help him, not really. She hadn't planned on offering any advice, but once the thoughts had formed, they'd been hard to hold back. Part of her, despite everything, still wanted to prove that she was more than the stereotype he had boxed her into. Before either of them could say more, Tasha emerged from the back, smiling brightly. "Got the job," she beamed, completely oblivious to the tension between Maya and Mr. Wilson. Maya forced a smile, happy for her friend, though her mind was still racing from the unexpected conversation she'd just had. "That's great, Tasha," Maya said, pulling her focus back to her friend. "We should celebrate." As the two of them left the store, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Not just between her and Mr. Wilson, but within the store itself. The place needed help, and Maya, despite her lingering resentment, couldn't help but think about how she could be the one to give it. What if, instead of walking away, she showed Mr. Wilson exactly how wrong he had been about her? What if she helped turn the store around and made it a success? It was a bold idea, one that seemed almost absurd, but the more Maya thought about it, the more it intrigued her. The idea that Maya could actually help Mr. Wilson's store festered in her mind over the next few days. It seemed crazy, really. Why would she go out of her way to assist someone who had treated her so unfairly? She had no reason to offer him anything, no obligation to fix the problems he clearly didn't understand. And yet, there was something about the challenge that stirred Maya's ambition. After all, wasn't this the kind of problem she was studying to solve? Marketing, customer engagement, and business growth were at the core of what she wanted to do with her life. In some ways, helping the store could be a real-world test of her skills. Besides, the thought of proving Mr. Wilson wrong in a way that didn't involve confrontation, by showing him just how capable she was, appealed to her. But she couldn't just walk in and offer her services unsolicited. That would be humiliating. So Maya waited. She wanted the opportunity to present itself naturally, even if a part of her was eager to get started. 2 weeks passed, and Maya began noticing subtle changes in the store each time she walked by. It wasn't anything major, just small adjustments like neater displays or slightly improved signage. It was clear that Mr. Wilson had taken some of her suggestions to heart, even if he hadn't acknowledged it. Yet the store still wasn't drawing the traffic it used to. The adjustments were too superficial, too incremental. It needed a complete overhaul, a real strategy to pull it out of its slump. The opportunity finally came on a drizzly Wednesday afternoon. Maya had just finished her last class of the day when her phone buzzed with a message from Tasha. "Can you stop by the store? Mr. Wilson wants to talk to you." Maya's heart skipped a beat. Mr. Wilson? Why on earth would he want to speak to her? Her initial thought was that maybe he was going to accuse her of something again, but she quickly dismissed that idea. No, something else was at play here. Curiosity gnawed at her as she made her way to the store. The light drizzle soaking into her hair and jacket. By the time she arrived, the usual bustle of the afternoon rush had faded, and the store was relatively quiet. Tasha waved her over from behind the counter with a conspiratorial smile. But before Maya could ask what this was all about, Mr. Wilson appeared. "Maya, can we talk in my office?" His voice was clipped, businesslike, but there was no hostility this time. If anything, he seemed tentative. Maya followed him into the small back office, her nerves tingling with a strange mix of anticipation and confusion. Once they were seated, Mr. Wilson wasted no time. "I've been thinking about what you said a couple of weeks ago," he began, his hands folded on the desk in front of him. "About the store and what it needs." Maya remained quiet, unsure of where this was heading. Mr. Wilson looked uncomfortable, clearly not used to asking for help, especially from someone he had wronged. "Sales have been down for a while," he continued, his eyes flicking to a stack of financial reports on his desk. "I've tried everything I know, but it's not working, and, well, I can't ignore the fact that since you made those suggestions, the little changes I implemented have made a slight difference, but it's not enough." He paused, visibly reluctant to say the next part, but he pushed through it. "I think you could help me. You seem to know more about this stuff than I do. And, I'm willing to listen." Maya raised an eyebrow, surprised by the humility in his tone. This was the same man who had humiliated her in front of customers, the same man who had judged her so quickly. And now here he was, asking for her help. She considered her response carefully. A part of her wanted to refuse, to let him stew in the consequences of his actions. But another part of her, the pragmatic, driven side, saw an opportunity. She could prove herself, not to Mr. Wilson necessarily, but to herself. She could take what she had learned in school and apply it to a real-world problem. Plus, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that the person who had underestimated her was now relying on her expertise. "Okay," Maya said slowly, "I'll help you. But if we do this, I need to have some control over the changes we implement. You'll have to trust my judgment." Mr. Wilson nodded, though Maya could tell it was hard for him. He wasn't used to relinquishing control, but desperation had a way of softening stubbornness. "Fair enough. What do you suggest we start with?" Maya leaned forward, her mind already buzzing with ideas. "First, we need to completely rethink your store layout. Customers need to feel like they know where to find what they want as soon as they walk in. Right now, the organization is all over the place. We'll also need to update your marketing strategy. Your target audience should be college students and young professionals, right? But you're not reaching them effectively. I noticed you don't have any social media presence to speak of. That needs to change immediately." Mr. Wilson scribbled down notes, though Maya could see he was still processing the reality of handing over such control to her. "What about promotions?" he asked. "We used to have good deals, but they don't seem to attract as many people anymore." "Because no one knows about them," Maya replied, her tone firm but professional. "Your promotions are too low-key. You need to be more aggressive with your advertising, especially online. Social media campaigns, targeted ads for students, maybe even partnering with local influencers. You're in a college town, Mr. Wilson. Your customer base is right in front of you, but you're not speaking their language." Mr. Wilson scratched his chin, clearly impressed but hesitant. "Influencers, huh? That's different." Maya smiled. "That's the point. You have to do something different if you want different results." Over the next hour, Maya laid out a detailed plan for revitalizing the store's image and boosting sales. Mr. Wilson listened, occasionally chiming in with questions, but largely letting Maya take the lead. It was a strange role reversal, considering their first interaction, but Maya didn't dwell on it. She was focused, her mind entirely on the task at hand. As the meeting wrapped up, Mr. Wilson leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I have to admit, I wasn't expecting this when I asked you for help. You know your stuff." Maya smiled faintly, but she didn't let his compliment soften her resolve. "I do. That's why I told you to trust me." "I can see that now." He glanced at the papers in front of him, his expression shifting to something almost apologetic. "Look, I know we didn't get off on the right foot. And I owe you an apology for that. I was wrong." The apology caught Maya off guard. She hadn't expected him to actually acknowledge the wrong he'd done, but there it was. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just saying it for the sake of the moment. He meant it. Maya's gaze softened slightly. "Thank you for saying that. It wasn't easy for me, but we can't change the past. What matters is that we move forward." Mr. Wilson nodded, seemingly relieved by her response. "Agreed." As Maya left the store that evening, her mind was already churning with more ideas and strategies. The partnership she had never expected was now in motion. It felt strange, almost surreal, to be working with someone who had once humiliated her, but Maya knew that this was about more than just her personal feelings. This was a chance to prove her worth, to take control of the narrative, and to show Mr. Wilson and the world that she was more than anyone had ever given her credit for. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, Maya felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She was turning the tables, and in the process, she was rewriting her own story. Weeks passed, and Maya's presence in the store became more consistent. What started as an informal agreement between her and Mr. Wilson had quickly turned into a regular collaboration. At first, Mr. Wilson had been hesitant, unsure of how much control he should hand over to Maya. But as the changes she implemented began to show results, his attitude slowly shifted. Customers were starting to return, and new faces were popping up every day. Maya's ideas weren't just theoretical. They were practical, effective, and exactly what the store needed. One of her first major moves had been to overhaul the store layout. She recognized that customers needed a sense of flow, a sense of ease when they navigated the aisles. The disorganized, cluttered feel of the previous setup had driven people away. But now, the shelves were strategically arranged to lead shoppers through the store in a way that highlighted new products, seasonal deals, and promotions. She had also introduced a fresh social media campaign. Tasha, now working part-time in the store, helped manage the store's social accounts. Together, they had launched a weekly promotion specifically targeting local college students with discounts and special offers. They set up small pop-up events, like weekend coffee stalls and giveaways, drawing more foot traffic and creating buzz within the community. To Maya's surprise, word of mouth about the store began to spread. Students who once barely glanced at the place were now talking about the exclusive student discounts and events hosted on campus. There were new faces every day, young people drawn in by the excitement of a business that finally seemed to understand what they wanted. And Mr. Wilson, watching all of this unfold, had to admit Maya had been right all along. He had resisted at first. The idea of partnering with local influencers, for example, seemed foreign and almost absurd to him. But Maya knew her audience. She knew that social media influencers, Students with local followings who regularly reviewed restaurants, stores, and other hangouts could drive traffic in ways that traditional advertising couldn't. Maya had convinced Mr. Wilson to partner with a few local college influencers, offering them products in exchange for promoting the store on their social media. The first few posts led to an immediate spike in foot traffic. Sales increased during the promotions, and more importantly, people started talking about the store. What had once been an overlooked business was now becoming part of the local scene. The numbers were clear. Foot traffic was up by nearly 30%, and sales had increased week after week. Mr. Wilson couldn't believe the turnaround, but the spreadsheets and data spoke for themselves. Despite all the success, there remained a lingering tension between Maya and Mr. Wilson. Though he had apologized for the initial confrontation, their relationship remained professional and somewhat distant. There was respect now, but it was as if neither of them quite knew how to navigate the emotional complexity of their past encounter. Maya, for her part, kept her focus on the work. She wanted the store to succeed, but she also felt a deeper sense of purpose in what she was doing. Every day she walked into that store, she was reminded of how easy it had been for Mr. Wilson to misjudge her, how his prejudice had led to that painful, humiliating experience. And now, here she was, using her skills to help him succeed. It was a powerful, somewhat bittersweet reversal of their initial dynamic. One evening, after closing time, Maya stayed late to finish up some reports in the office. The store was quiet, the aisles dimly lit, and the hum of the overhead lights filled the stillness. Mr. Wilson entered the office, holding a cup of coffee. He paused at the door, hesitating before speaking. "Things are looking good," he said finally, breaking the silence. "I never imagined the store would turn around like this." Maya glanced up from her computer, surprised by the softness in his tone. "It's been a team effort," she replied. "But there's still a lot of work to do if we want to keep this momentum going." Mr. Wilson nodded, stepping further into the room. He seemed restless, as though something was on his mind. For a moment, Maya wondered if he was going to bring up the incident from all those weeks ago. But instead, he sat down across from her, staring at his coffee. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about that day, when I accused you." Maya felt her body tense, though she kept her expression neutral. She had spent so much time trying to move past it, focusing on the work, that she hadn't expected him to bring it up again. "I was wrong," Mr. Wilson continued, his voice unsteady. "I've been thinking about it a lot, actually, about why I did what I did, and I've realized that it wasn't just a mistake, it was something deeper. I was acting on assumptions, on things that I've let cloud my judgment for years, and I need to own up to that." Maya's eyes met his, and for the first time she saw something in Mr. Wilson that she hadn't seen before. Vulnerability. His face was etched with regret, not just for the way he had treated her, but for the way he had allowed his own biases to guide his actions. It was as if helping him save his store had forced him to confront parts of himself he had never been willing to examine. "I can't change what happened," Mr. Wilson went on, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want you to know that I've learned from it. Working with you has shown me how wrong I was, about you and probably about a lot of other things too. And I'm sorry." Maya sat quietly for a moment, absorbing his words. She had imagined what an apology from Mr. Wilson would feel like, how satisfying it would be to hear him admit his mistakes. But now that it was happening, she realized that what she felt wasn't satisfaction, but relief. Relief that he had finally come to understand the weight of his actions. Relief that he had taken the time to reflect and grow. "Thank you," Maya said softly. "I appreciate that, and I'm glad you've taken the time to reflect on it. It wasn't easy for me to deal with at the time, but I didn't want that moment to define either of us." Mr. Wilson nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "You're a good person, Maya. I've learned a lot from you. Not just about business, but about myself." There was a long pause as the weight of his words settled between them. Maya felt a sense of closure that she hadn't realized she needed. It wasn't about winning or proving anything anymore. It was about healing, about moving forward with a new understanding of one another. After a moment, Maya smiled gently. "Well, I'm glad we've moved past that. Now let's focus on making sure this store keeps growing." Mr. Wilson chuckled. a lightness in his voice that hadn't been there before. Agreed. We've got a lot more work to do. The conversation shifted back to business, but something had changed between them. The air felt lighter, more open. For the first time, Maya felt that they were working together as equals, with mutual respect, not just for each other's skills, but for who they were as people. As the weeks rolled on, the store's success continued to grow. Maya's strategies had not only revitalized the business, but had also brought the community together in new ways. Customers felt welcomed, engaged, and appreciated in a way they hadn't before. And Mr. Wilson, once so set in his ways, had become more open, more willing to listen and learn. One day, as Maya watched customers browse the aisles of the newly thriving store, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not just because of the business success, but because she had been a part of something bigger than herself. She had helped transform a place that had once made her feel small into something positive, something inclusive. She had taken the hurt and frustration from that initial encounter and turned it into something powerful, growth, both for herself and for the people around her. And that, she realized, was the best kind of victory. The transformation of the store had not just been about sales or foot traffic. It had become a symbol of something greater: change, understanding, and growth. As the weeks turned into months, the success of the store rippled through the community. Word had spread about the once struggling business that had somehow reinvented itself and turned into a local favorite, all thanks to the innovative strategies introduced by Maya. Mr. Wilson, who had once been the poster child of rigid, outdated thinking, now moved through the store with a renewed energy. His interactions with customers had softened. No longer the gruff and suspicious manager, he greeted shoppers with a smile and an air of openness. Even the employees noticed the shift. Tasha, now fully immersed in her part-time role at the store, remarked often on how different the atmosphere felt. "He's changed so much," Tasha commented one afternoon while helping Maya set up a community event in the store. "I never thought he'd be the type to throw a community event like this." "You did that, Maya." Maya smiled at her friend's comment, though she couldn't help but reflect on the truth of it. It wasn't just the store that had changed. Mr. Wilson had changed, and in a way, so had she. The event they were preparing for was a celebration of the store's success. A customer appreciation day aimed at giving back to the community that had supported the business. Maya had suggested the idea a few weeks earlier, and Mr. Wilson had immediately agreed. They had planned the event to include discounts, giveaways, and even a collaboration with local food vendors to offer free snacks. It was the kind of event that brought people together, something Maya knew the store needed to cement its place in the community. As they hung banners and arranged tables, Mr. Wilson approached with a smile that still seemed new and unfamiliar to Maya. "Looks great, doesn't it?" he said, surveying the setup. "I'm really glad we did this." Maya nodded. "It's important to connect with the community. This store isn't just a business, it's a part of the neighborhood now. That's what will keep it thriving." Mr. Wilson's smile faltered for a moment, replaced by a look of contemplation. "You know, I never saw it that way before. I always thought of this place as just a job, something I needed to keep afloat. But since we've started working together, I've realized that it's more than that. It's not just about making money, it's about people. The customers, the employees, everyone." Maya looked at him, surprised by the depth of his reflection. She had seen the changes in him, yes, but hearing him articulate it so openly felt like a turning point. "You've come a long way," she said softly. Mr. Wilson's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the weight of everything they had been through hung in the air between them. "I have you to thank for that," he admitted, his voice tinged with sincerity. "You didn't just help this store. You helped me see things differently. I've been stuck in my ways for too long, and I never really stopped to think about how I was treating people, how I was letting my own assumptions cloud my judgment." Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was the closure she hadn't even realized she needed, the acknowledgement that her impact had been more than just about business. It had been personal. It had been transformative. "There was a time when I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive you," Maya said, her voice measured. What you did that day hurt me more than I can put into words. But seeing how far you've come, how much you've changed, I realize now that it wasn't about me proving you wrong. It was about us both learning something. About each other and about ourselves. Mr. Wilson nodded, his eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. I'm just glad I had the chance to make things right. And I'll keep trying, every day, to do better. Before Maya could respond, the first wave of customers began to arrive for the event. The store quickly filled with people, the buzz of conversation and laughter filling the air as shoppers took advantage of the sales and enjoyed the free food. Maya watched as Mr. Wilson greeted people with genuine warmth, handing out discounts and thanking them for their support. It was a far cry from the man who had once accused her so coldly. As the event went on, Maya couldn't help but reflect on how different things might have been if she had chosen to walk away from the store after that initial incident. It would have been easier, perhaps, to hold on to her anger, to let it fester and walk away with the satisfaction of knowing she was right. But instead, she had leaned into the discomfort, embraced the challenge, and in doing so, had not only transformed the store, but had also fostered growth in herself and in Mr. Wilson. By the time the event wound down, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow through the store's windows. The turnout had been even better than they had expected, and both Maya and Mr. Wilson were thrilled with the results. As they packed up the remaining banners and cleaned up, Mr. Wilson approached Maya one last time. I was thinking, he began. I know you've got your own career path ahead of you, but if you ever wanted to stay on and keep helping with the business, I'd love to have you. You've got a talent, Maya. This store wouldn't be where it is today without you. Maya smiled, deeply touched by the offer. I appreciate that, Mr. Wilson. Really, I do. But I think my future is somewhere else. This was an incredible experience, but I have other goals to chase. Mr. Wilson nodded, understanding. Of course, you're going to do great things, Maya. I'm sure of it. As they shared a final handshake, a sense of mutual respect and understanding passed between them. The weight of their past conflict had lifted, replaced by a shared recognition of how far they had both come. Later that evening, as Maya walked home, the streets quieting around her, she reflected on the journey that had led her here. She had taken a painful, humiliating experience and turned it into something constructive, something meaningful. She had faced prejudice head-on, not with anger or bitterness, but with persistence, skill, and grace. And in doing so, she had not only proven her worth to Mr. Wilson, but to herself. Maya's heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. She had grown, not just as a professional, but as a person. She had helped change someone else's perspective and had helped foster a sense of community in a place that had once made her feel so unwelcome. There was still a long way to go. There always would be when it came to fighting prejudice and injustice. But Maya knew that she had made a difference, even if it was just one small corner of the world. And that, she realized, was more than enough. As the night closed in around her, Maya smiled to herself. The future stretched out before her, full of possibility. Whatever came next, she was ready. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch. We appreciate your support, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.